You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. In this episode, we're focusing on climate innovation, specifically how climate-focused technologies are being developed, commercialized, and scaled. We'll look at how tech transfer offices and startups can build sustainability into their work and what makes these kinds of innovations different from more traditional technologies. Our guest brings experience from both the business and policy sides of climate solutions and has worked on projects that aim to reduce emissions while also creating practical benefits for everyday life. Today, we're joined by Josh Dorfman. Josh is the co-founder and CEO of Planted, a company creating carbon-negative building materials. The company was recently recognized by Fast Company as one of the world's most innovative companies. Josh also launched the Lazy Environmentalist, a media platform that helped make sustainability more approachable for consumers. And now he runs Supercool, where he highlights climate technologies with real-world impact. Josh's experience working with both startups and established companies like Brita give him a unique perspective on how innovation, business, and policy come together in the climate space. Welcome, Josh. Really excited to have you on the air today.
Thank you, Lisa. It is a pleasure to be here speaking with you.
Well, I'm excited to have you on because we're going to talk all things climate innovation and climate-focused technologies. So to get us started, I thought the best place to begin would be with your origin story. Tell us a little bit about how you first got involved in the climate innovation space.
For me, just even thinking about climate actually goes back to being a English teacher in China in the 1990s.
Wow.
I'd gone over to Nanjing thinking about a career probably in foreign service. I started getting interested in China coming out of college, graduated in 1994. So 1995, I'm in Nanjing. I'm teaching on the Nanjing University of Science and Technology, teaching grad students, having this really interesting experience, trying to learn as much Chinese as I can. And I ended up getting this part-time job in a factory that made bicycle locks for an American company called Kryptonite that was very, very popular at the time. Bike locks, stronger than Superman. And I then went to work full-time for Kryptonite. We opened more factories. We were looking at this massive Chinese market with 1 billion people riding bicycles, and just the future seemed amazing. We opened a third or fourth factory in southern China, just outside the city of Guangzhou. And I was traveling with the owner of that factory, a Chinese man, to this restaurant we were going to celebrate. Consummate the deal, toast in, with their grain alcohol, Baijio with a little snake blood in there. And, that's the way these guys did it. We get to the parking lot. We're in his Mercedes. We get out. And before we go in, he says, Josh, look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes in this parking lot. And, I was young. I was 25 or 26, but I thought, my gosh, you want exactly what we want in America. More, bigger, right? More development, understandably. And we're exporting this. This is globalization. We want you to raise your quality of life. At least we did, before, right? The China dynamic's more complicated today. And in that moment, I thought, there's going to be 1 billion cars here. I don't know anything about global warming, but you could see what they want. You could see the infrastructure, tunnels, bridges, highways coming in so quickly. And that triggered for me, I would say, an odyssey that I went on probably for 5 to 6 years. Went back to America or came back to the States, got my MBA, went through the .com thing, but I never shook this feeling like I'd seen the future. I have to do something about that. I started my first company in 2004. It was a modern design, sustainable furniture and furnishings company. And that was really kind of where my journey began. And it just took years to sort of coalesce and figure out what was I going to do with that knowledge.
It's a good thing you weren't in Copenhagen or Amsterdam where there are a lot of bikes, right? Because this story might have ended up very differently, very, very differently. But I want to turn and talk a little bit about Planted because they're working on carbon negative materials, particularly structural materials made out of perennial grass and resin. So not using trees at all, which I think is absolutely incredible. How has the commercialization process for that technology been different than other innovation pathways that you've seen?
With Planted, early on in our development, we knew that this could go one of two ways from a commercialization go to market. The one way would be the more common, more difficult approach that a lot of entrepreneurs have to take, which is, okay, we're going to build these structural building materials. They're going to replace like plywood, oriented strand board. It's the board that you nail to the 2x4s as you're putting a house together. Well, we knew we were making out of a renewable material. We weren't quite sure that it was going to be this perennial grass that we landed on. We were testing hemp, we were testing other things, but the path to market that was clearest was to go talk to green builders. And green builders, were aligned philosophically, aligned ideologically, but the scale wasn't there. You'd have to go reach tons and tons of smaller builders to actually start to build your market. And I knew that was going to, it would be like hand-to-hand combat. It would be one small distributor after another. But that was the clearest path because probably that's who would talk to us and where there was most affinity. The other opportunity, which is what we ended up pursuing, was to go to the top of the market, to the largest builders in the country who are publicly traded builders who therefore have a different view around sustainability because of who their stakeholders are. Right? They have public markets and they have to do different reporting. And it was either going to be one or the other. And we were fortunate early on that D.R. Horton, the largest home builder in the country, that builds one out of every 7 homes in America today, came to our prototype shop in Durham, North Carolina, our dingy little shop. We put on a really awesome show for them. And we started to open a path to go up market to the biggest builders in the country, particularly and specifically with D.R. Horton, which is driving our go-to-market today.
What's scaling going to look like for that? I mean, if you end up being adopted for home building across the country or the world, let's say, the scaling of that's going to be pretty incredible, I would think.
The scaling, no doubt, will be profound. The key to that business, I would say, is the team that's in place to run it. I co-founded Planted with 2 engineers from SpaceX and who had spent years and years at SpaceX working on the life support systems team, keeping astronauts alive on the Dragon crew spacecraft, doing unbelievable work. And when you spend years at SpaceX, kind of in that culture, right, in that kind of like cauldron where you have to really survive, and you get trained, thinking about something like Planted is right in your wheelhouse. And what I mean by that is there are so many steps that would be daunting to many entrepreneurs. We identified this perennial grass that we wanted to plant and grow, or at least use, let me say. And then we discovered there was no supply chain. No one was growing this grass commercially. We couldn't call someone up and be like, hey, we'll take an order for 5,000 tons of this perennial grass. No. We had to figure out everything, which meant we had to stand up a tissue culture lab to just start to even get these plants and proliferate them. We probably run the biggest tissue culture lab in North Carolina today, and that's just one component. To SpaceXers, it's like, well, nothing's harder than building a rocket ship, so yeah, we'll figure that out, right? And so when you think about projecting out, okay, you got to build, verticalize, and grow that supply chain. You have to build first of its kind technology. So let's do it in a way where we keep the cost low. Let's build it in a modular fashion where we don't need $300 or $400 or $500 million like a typical mill today. Let's do it for orders of magnitude less. You have the flexibility to drive massive scalability. And so, yeah, this is going to look like a whole bunch of factories around the United States and ultimately probably around the globe.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to watch. Very, very exciting. So I want to turn, Josh, and ask you, for tech transfer offices that are looking to build sustainability into their strategy, what do you think are some good first steps
I certainly think, and you're starting to see this all around the US, that many cities are developing these ecosystems around sustainability, around climate tech. I think the transfer offices, of course, they're looking internally, right? They're saying, okay, what's being developed by our professors, what's being developed by our students, and all of that needs attention, needs work. There's some there is some really cool stuff going on in North Carolina and Raleigh-Durham right now, and NC State and elsewhere. But it's equally important to be integrated into that tech ecosystem, right? So that you know who the external entrepreneurs, and you're building these linkages, not just with big corporates, but I think with the tech companies that are rapidly growing, because by and large, everybody knows each other, and you want to be there so you can make those linkages for the technologies that you've got, kind of in your university. I think that's really important. Building that connectivity, really getting integrated into the ecosystem. And so people are starting to look at your university or your research, the research labs you represent, and are paying attention. You got to do that as early as possible.
Now, you've founded a number of startups, and as you well know, there's often pressure to move fast with them. How do you make room for sustainability with a startup without slowing down the innovation?
It's definitely, well, I have two views on it. One, the companies that I found or get involved with early on are companies where sustainability is baked right into the product or service itself. So meaning that it's not a bolt-on, we don't tack on the sustainability. It's really like in the case of Planted, the more building materials we can put into the market, the more good we are doing for the planet. These are materials that are sequestering carbon that's been removed from the atmosphere. And so figuring out a product or a service that has that value proposition makes that simple, right? In that sense, the other thing that, Lisa, when you asked the question, that triggered for me is, I think the trick, and this is not just a sustainability or climate tech thing, but I think the trick is to go really fast, but not too fast where you overcommit too early to the wrong path. We almost did that with hemp. We got very excited about hemp. Everybody's very excited about hemp, or at least there's a core built-in constituency when you start saying, hey, we're going to do something with hemp. Like people, from all walks of life, right, and all generations are like, you got a lot of fans. And we did a lot of R&D, and ultimately, I think, and had we raised our seed round 3 or 4 months earlier than we ended up doing it, we might have been already committed to a development path on the ag that could have killed the company. And so I don't really have a playbook for how you get that right. But I know that, again, with Wada Tan, who is our, he's co-founder, COO, he's also really has the CTO responsibility under him, was leading R&D. We exhausted so many options before we finally said, okay, this is the biomass we're going to go, bet the company on.
Now, I want to turn and talk a little bit about another one of your current projects, which is Supercool, where you're focusing on technologies that not only reduce emissions, but also improve everyday life. Like I was listening to an episode on Supercool that had to do with food waste. Share with us some of the examples of some of the things that you're focusing on with Supercool.
So the overarching premise of Supercool is we are in a new moment where more climate solutions are beyond the pilot stage, commercially scaling up market to cut carbon, boost profits, and improve quality of life. So that's the filter where we say, what's out there? Let's go explore. We've seen some really interesting examples in what's called the circular economy. You mentioned the company that does food waste. I mean, the food waste thing, that's a company called WasteLess. It's what I love about what they're doing is they're looking at $1 trillion problem, a huge climate crisis, a huge moral failure in terms of throwing away food all across the value chain, a huge profit suck or cost generator, right, for companies. And they're not saying, like a lot of other companies do, oh, okay, when the food gets past the sell-by date, we'll take it, we'll redistribute it, it's still good. They've got a more proactive solution that says, let's not even get to the sell-by date. Let's use AI. Let's use some machine learning. Let's just start doing something that's never been done before, which is dynamic discounting, right?
It was really creative. It seemed obvious once they mentioned it, but not obvious at the same time.
Yeah. And the key for them, like all these companies, is figuring out how do we make this so seamless, drop-in easy for these huge global supermarket chains that they're going to say yes and get to a place where you, as the customer, are seeing an ROI almost instantly, right? So we've seen that. We've seen one of the other ones that I thought was very interesting was a company called Upway, which was founded by a team in France, and now it's also expanding globally. It's here in the US, expanding very, very rapidly across the US. Upway provides the infrastructure, kind of like, it's like the Carvana for e-bikes. And until you get into that, you don't really appreciate or understand the dynamics of how important our Carvana is, or in this case, an Upway. Because if you buy a Trek, may be the wrong example, but more pure brands like Lectric or Aventura or these other brands. Like when you buy off their site and you get that bike shipped to you, that e-bike, if you don't want it, you send it back, it's probably going to Upway. Upway's taking it, right? They're this back end invisible engine that makes this market grow. And what that enables, and they'll buy used bikes as well. But what it enables is the builders of new e-bikes, they're able to capture more value. They can continue to charge high prices because now there's a built-in market for used bikes, which also keeps those prices, it's discounted so more people can ask, but still elevated enough where the whole market stays buoyant and can move forward. It's like all this infrastructure that is invisible to us, but is really building this low carbon economy. We dig into that, and we dig into it to understand, what's your superpower? How are you able to build this company as a startup, as a tech company with a climate mission? And what are the enablers? What are the market dynamics? But what do you do that's really special that we can learn that probably has some universality that other founders and people in other industries are going to be able to learn from too?
Now, in addition to all the startups that you've founded, you've also worked with some major brands, like Brita is one example of a big brand that you've worked with, where the focus is often on reaching large audiences and making sustainable choices more accessible. And that kind of scale can be a powerful force in climate action, especially when it's paired with the agility and innovation that startups bring to the table. So with that in mind, what have you learned from working with these large brands, and how can partnerships between startups and established companies support climate goals?
When the exciting thing about large brands is that when they commit, they are, this has been my experience, they're really committed. And so you can, like you're saying, the scope and scale of what can be accomplished just because of their size is massive.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
Right? Like I remember years ago, as I was just getting into these industries, I was at a conference where someone from Ford was on stage talking about their Rouge factory, the Rouge plant, which was one of their original factories. And they had brought in this incredible architect, William McDonough, who's one of the most famous sustainable architects on the planet. And they had built one of the most sustainable, forward-looking green factories in the world. And the scale of it was like, I can't remember what he said, but it was something like half the size of Central Park in New York City or something. And it was huge. And I remember walking out and just kind of out in the lobby talking with someone who was, more kind of on the activist side, who just was like, I will never buy a Ford. And I was like, well, okay, but you could go buy, I don't know what you would buy, but if when Ford moves the needle like 1 or 2%, that's just like so much more massive for the planet than like tons of little startups moving it at a higher percentage rate, just as the scale. And so working with Brita was a really exciting opportunity because they had come up with this simple idea to take a Brita pitcher, pair it with an Nalgene water bottle, and say, hey, don't buy disposable water bottles. Right? Nobody wants to buy disposable water bottles, but it's about convenience. And at the time I had a brand called the Lazy Environmentalist. It was a TV show, a radio show. So I was doing a lot of that. And, they can get their message places that you just can't do either. So we were on Fox and Friends. We were on just a whole suite of national appearances, just getting those eyeballs, getting the message out, really exciting. And I think for startups, to your other point, who want to work with big brands and are targeting big brands, the key is still, though, like message alignment, total professionalism. I mean, you have to make it really easy for them to say yes to you, because if you're approaching them, more than likely, someone's looking for a reason to say no because they get pitched so much. You just have to be on their level in everything about your game as you're trying to work with them.
Now, I want to turn to policy for a little bit because, Josh, as you know, it plays a big role in shaping what's possible in this space. And, it's very interesting times right now, which we won't delve into, but curious to know how you see the relationship between innovation, business, and government evolving.
The way I see it evolving is, I guess what I would say is it clearly ebbs and flows. And clearly the previous administration had a massive view around climate and sustainability, created lots and lots of tailwinds. It was very exciting. This administration is clearly leaning more into AI, big data center infrastructure, national security. It's a different lens. The way that I've started to think about it was actually informed by a woman we brought onto our show who's an investment banker, a managing partner at a firm called CRCIB. It's like a specialty clean tech investment bank. She's been doing this for a very long time, billions and billions of dollars in deals. And I was asking her the question. This was probably in January. And she said to me, she's like, look, the policies, the incentives, they always ebb and flow. Right? Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. But when you look at these industries, like when you look at battery, you look at solar, you look at wind, you look at all of these technologies, and you look at the cost curve, right? It's remarkable how much these technologies are starting just to be able to really stand on their own. On top of that, if the federal government starts to pull back some of these incentives, states, cities, more subnational governments start to step in, and the industries march forward. The other thing I would say about that, Lisa, and this is a little bit more of a global perspective, one of the reasons why we started Supercool was, yes, one, there are all these climate tech companies we see that are now Series B and beyond in market, very exciting. Globally, $2 trillion was invested in clean energy technologies in 2024, which was $1 trillion more than in fossil fuels. In the United States, which was really at historic levels of around $330 some odd billion, is only 16% of that total. So the global march toward this low carbon future is, in my view, inevitable. And the momentum is not even that well understood in the US. So I just think there's a lot of reasons why this is an exciting moment, regardless of potentially some momentary headwinds that the industry is facing.
Yeah, exactly. It is a fascinating time, and it's going to be really interesting to watch. And that leads me to ask you, keeping kind of on that thread a little bit, how do you think tech transfer professionals can help play a more significant role in moving some of these climate solutions forward?
Well, I think the exciting thing for tech transfer professionals and just for the university environment in general is you have with every passing year, you have more kids coming into universities who are more sophisticated than the year before. I was briefly in a PhD program at George Washington University about 20 years ago in political science and China environment as I was trying to figure out my path. And I was just blown away by these kids who were in school like a decade after me, already just in terms of their sophistication. So the good news is when you have this more fertile pool of ideas and skill sets coming in, and the early stages of cultivating these ideas and actually getting them ready for market, that's far less impacted, I think, by what's happening at the federal level. And so I do think this is just a huge time for, in tech transfer and technology development in universities to build those other linkages. We talked about early on building external linkages, but really figuring out how do we cultivate, more programs, more entrepreneurship, more training, more resources, more labs for what we can enable within the university environment. We were actually just talking recently, I haven't reached out yet, but there's a course that's taught at MIT around technology and entrepreneurship and climate. I forget the exact name, but the number of startups that have come out of there, they have raised something like $20 billion some odd dollars.
Incredible amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Staggering. And like, I was thinking about it, and I was talking with my co-founder here at Supercool, and I was saying like, that's like so much more superior and successful to any accelerator, any incubator in the kind of private sector ever. And so the potential's there, and it's just going really early and saying, let's identify what technologies do we have within our university ecosystem? How do we pull, in this case, interdisciplinary teams together into this course to start looking at these and figure out paths to market? And then let's go build those linkages with the outside world.
Yeah, that's incredible. All based on a course, right? Who would have thought? Incredible. Sometimes the programs that come out of universities like MIT and others. So, you have a lot of experience. You've formed a lot of startups, been in this space for a while. So what advice would you give to startups that are trying to bring sustainable technologies to the market?
I think the thing that I would say about sustainable technologies and to your question, bring them to market, is on many levels, it's the same as bringing any technology to market, right? And so I think that as sustainability entrepreneurs or climate entrepreneurs, we're asking that question, but I think fundamentally everything's the same. If you think about climate, you think about sustainability. If you lean into that strategically, it can be a value add that opens doors. If you lean into it as a crutch, it will be something that just slows you down. And so what I mean by that is, early on, when if you lean into it strategically, okay, you can recruit really great talent who wants to be part of that mission. They can do wonderful stuff internally, right? But externally, if you're trying to get early traction or maybe get some early pilots with some other companies, nobody buys climate, right? I should say no. Very few are buying climate. Very few are buying sustainability. They're buying, what are the outcomes? What are the results that you are going to provide my business that's going to improve my business? Once those outcomes and results for the business, right? You're going to cut my costs. You're going to make it easier for me to do maintenance. You're going to do something for my business. Then everybody wants to tout and celebrate the sustainability, right? But so understanding where to use it, when to use it as a kind of differentiator is great, but you got to avoid, leaning on it too much, which can slow you down.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And, a fun question for you, given all you're doing there was super cool. If I ask you to look ahead a little bit, what areas of climate innovation do you think are underexplored but have strong potential?
One of the areas that I'm very excited about, I find fascinating, is this concept of urban mining. This concept that we need all of these, let's say, critical minerals, rare earth minerals, all of these, as our president calls the rare earths, right? We need the rare earths. Okay. China has a very, I wouldn't say stranglehold, but controls a lot of the global supply chains because 20 years ago, decades ago, they saw where the future was going, made some big bets, and were very smart about it. We just took a different approach here in the West. But when you look at what we have in the West, we have all the stuff that has all the rare earths in them. We had a company on the show called Cyclic Materials that is the only company in the world. It's a Canadian company. They're opening their commercial scale factory in Arizona. It's the only company in the world that's actually figured out how to recycle rare earth magnets, which are in every powerful electric motor, right? It's the only company in the world that's figured it out. And what they had to figure out was, how do you remove the rare earth magnets at the end of a life of, it could be an EV motor, it could be a wind turbine, it could be a hard disk drive in a data center or an MRI machine, or your electric lawn tools, right? But all of them have these. How do we recycle it and separate the rare earth magnets from the steel that's inside these motors as well, which has been an impossible problem until they solved it. And they're tapping into supply chains for end-of-life materials that already exist. It's all the stuff that's in our urban landscapes, right, where there's the most people. They don't, but before it gets to the landfill, right, where there's waste streams that are on their way, where they can say, "Oh, thank you very much. We'll take this. We'll take this. We'll take this." That we're going to see so much more of that. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why I think this is so exciting, is because certainly the clean tech revolution or evolution is going to relies on these materials, but so does just modern civilization. And you see in a place like Taiwan, an island that's a modern country that just doesn't have a lot of resources, urban mining is extremely prevalent. And it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine for what's coming for the rest of the world.
So, Josh, I wanted to ask you, are there any common roadblocks or missed opportunities you've seen when it comes to commercializing sustainable technologies?
I think it comes back to something we've touched on in this conversation, and that is when you're commercializing or trying to build your business, the tech founders in general get very, very, they fall in love with their tech. And it's kind of like we've talked about with the messaging. If you fall in love with your tech, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, gosh, I'm running this building. What I'd really love in my building, what I really need today is some more AI. Right? Nobody says that. But they might say, I would love a solution that cuts my HVAC bills by 25% and maybe it's going to cut my carbon too. Well, that's Brainbox AI. They figured that. And what they had to figure out to get to 15,000 buildings and get acquired by Train was selling outcomes, right? How do we go frame this for either that CFO or facilities manager or whomever, where we are selling the results they're looking for, and we're not selling climate, right? Or Sunrun. Q1 of 2025, this is the largest home solar company in America. 69% of new solar customers also purchased batteries for storage. Well, how did they do that? And it's double the industry. Well, they do it by leaning into control of costs, peace of mind in an outage, all these things that actually a homeowner wants. No one cares about the actual battery. And so really leaning into that kind of sales value proposition to meet your customers where they are can drive great results.
Josh, as the podcast comes to a close, as you look ahead, what gives you the most hope about the future of climate innovation? And what's one thing you think we'll all need to do differently to get there?
Here's what gives me lots of hope for the future. It is conventionally accepted, conventional wisdom that the next generations coming up are the most will be the most impacted by climate. They're most aware of climate. They're going to solve the problem. When I look at the guests that we've brought on to Supercool, who are running, in my view, some of the most impactful growth stage climate tech unicorns on the planet, almost to a T, they're all in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s. And so the climate challenge is now. And the greatest entrepreneurs in the world who are actually solving it are not 20-somethings in a dorm room. I mean, they're there, but this is an opportunity for all ages to bring their skills and their experience and their successes and failures to the table to understand what do we need to do to go from here. That's what gives me the most hope. I think the one thing that we can do differently is give some thought to something we never actually think about, but is the money we've parked in our bank, in our checking account, in our saving account. What is that bank doing with that cash? And what I mean is, while we talk about trillions of dollars flowing into clean tech, there's still, trillions of dollars flowing into fossil fuels. And where we just sort of by default put our money, those banks are underwriting things that may not align with our values. And I have seen more banks, kind of pure play banks, come to market and actually, have now starting to move into the billions of dollars of funds, that they are, responsible. I'm thinking of Climate First Bank, where you have an opportunity. I think we all have an opportunity to think about where we bank and how that money is being used kind of while we sleep.
Well, thank you so much, Josh, for spending some time with us today to talk about climate innovation, climate-focused technologies. This has really been a very insightful conversation. Really appreciate all your time and your expertise.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a very thought-provoking and fun conversation.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. A big thank you to Josh for joining us and sharing his insights on how climate innovation is evolving and what it really takes to move sustainable technologies from idea to impact. This conversation was a reminder that climate solutions aren't just about cutting emissions. They're also about improving how we live and work. For tech transfer professionals, there's a real opportunity to think more intentionally about how sustainability can be a part of everyday innovation strategy. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Autumn on the Air.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.